Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. So a few weeks ago I had the requirement to add a comment section into an app that I was building, and I had a look online and I couldn't quite find something that fit what I wanted, so I built one from scratch, as all engineers do. And the cool thing about it is that it allows for any backend to be plugged in and also allows to be rendered in any front-end framework. So that's what we're going to be learning today. As an example, I'm going to be building out a in-memory backend and I'm going to be using React as a front end, but like I said, you can use anything you like. So if you enjoyed this kind of content, please consider subscribing, and let's get right into it. So this on the right hand side is what we're going to be building. So we can add a simple comment here, and we can add another one. So very simple, and you can reply and delete. So I can delete one here and I can also reply. And the only caveat about the one that we're building today is it's going to be one level deep. So you can only reply, if I just add another one here, you're only going to apply one level deep to a comment similar to the YouTube style system, but the underlying system here and the underlying structure will allow you to basically have an infinite level reply. But for this one here, it's just one level deep, and that's just because that's the way I built my comment section. And yeah, let's get started. So we're going to be starting completely from scratch, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a library directory, and this is just to keep the core of our comments library separate from the front end. This is just to show you that it works for any front end, but realistically you can just chuck it in with the rest of your front end code. I'm going to jump into library and I'm going to initialize an npm project. So npm init, and I'm going to skip, I'm going to do -y, and I'm only going to install one dependency, and that's just going to be TypeScript. So TypeScript is quite important here, just to define all the types, which basically allows us to plug in things into the interface, basically add implementations of the interface. So once that's created here, I'm just going to copy over a TS config that I have. Not too important here, it's just going to add the configuration for TypeScript that I'm looking for. And the only other thing here, I'm going to just add a script here to basically compile my work while I'm working on it. So I'm just going to run this guy, and this just means everything that's output will go into the distribution folder. So let's just make sure that this is all working fine. Yeah, we need an index.ts file, of course, for it to start. So I'm going to do index.ts just to give it a starting point, and that should be it. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to define our comment model, what a comment looks like, and we're going to define an interface as well that's going to control all our basically backend and front ends. So if we start off with the comment type, so we just have a simple comment type. We're going to assume it's got an ID. I'm just going to give it a string here, and we're also just going to assume you have a user ID of string as well. So we're not actually going to implement any authentication or anything here, but we're just going to assume there is a user ID. In my app, I also added additional metadata like an avatar URL and full name. So you can add all that. In this case, we're just going to keep it simple and just avoid all those here. Next up, we're just going to add a created at date. Again, this is so you can show things like how long ago the comment was added, or you might want to sort things based off of the date. We're going to add the comment itself in text. In theory, this is all you need for a comment. We're going to add one more field, which is basically going to allow for our relationships. And this is the parent comment ID. And this is going to be either a string or a null. So what this allows us to do is it allows us to store the comment in a flat structure. But depending on the parent comment ID, that's how it's going to basically relate to other comments. So if it's a null, that means we know it's a top level comment because it's got no parent. And then every reply to whatever comment it is, you can add the ID of the parent. And in this case, again, it works for any level, any number of level deep. Later on in the front end code, I'm going to restrict mine so that it can only basically go one level deep. But like I said here, the structure allows for kind of maximum flexibility there. So now that we know what our comment looks like, we need some sort of interface for plugins to implement. So let's add that in now. I'm going to call this comments backend. So this is our backend interface. And we're going to add our first function. We need a way to fetch the comments. So fetch comments, all it does, it's a promise that returns a bunch of comments. Again, I'm going to keep this very simple, so I'm not going to add different pagination or different filters, etc. Just going to keep it very simple for this scenario here. Next up, we need a way to add comments. So let's add an add comment, and add comment is going to be a partial comment here. We'll add this type in a second. So this is just an alias type really, and it just returns void, doesn't really return anything. And finally here, we're just going to do delete comment, which takes in the ID of a comment and just deletes it. Again, you can add things like edit, you can add different interface functions if you're going to like and dislike and all these fancy things, but I'm just going to keep it very simple for here. So let's just define this new comment type, and this is just going to be, we're going to pick from the comment, we're just going to take the user ID, the text, and the parent comment ID. Everything else will be generated in this case, and obviously depending if you've got more fields, there might be additional things. And at its core, this is all you need. This is all you need to have the pluggable system. Very simple, all it is interface, no implementation everywhere, no complexity, very nice. Now, next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add a separate file for backends, right? So this is gonna house any number of backends that we have. And we're just gonna add this one here, new file, and let's just call this backends.ts. So we're going to add an implementation for our comments, and then after that we'll build a separate front end in the in a separate directory, and we'll just basically use the back end there. So let's get right into the back end. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add some imports from our index file, and then we're just going to define a class. So this is going to be our in-memory backend. And again, at this point you can do whatever you want: Firebase, Postgres, even a REST API. But as long as it implements our comments backend. And of course, because we're implementing our comments backend, we need to add the implementation of all the functions here. So this is just some skeleton functionality here. So we have our fetch, add, and delete. So let's basically fill those in. So because this is an in-memory backend, what we're going to do is we're going to keep a reference to the comments in the class itself, right? So I'm just going to have a list of comments here, initialized to an empty array. And I'm also going to have an ID here, and this is just to keep a counter. I'm just using an incremental ID here, but of course if you have something like a database, that will be handled for you, so we don't need that. So first things first, let's fetch our comments. Well, all we want to do is we want to return the comments that are in memory here. So we're just going to return this.comments, very simple. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add comments. So to add a comment, what we want to do is we just basically want to update this list, right? So let's spread over the existing comments, and then we're going to add a new comment with an ID, again, incrementing ID here. And then we're going to add the created at with the new date. And then we're just going to spread over the new comment. So this takes in a new comment. We're just going to spread that in. And that basically handles the, adding comments. This doesn't return anything, so that's fine as is. And the final thing here we're going to do is for deleting, we're basically going to do the opposite of this. What we're going to do is we're going to go over all the comments, and we're going to filter out anything that that matches the ID given. Now, note here that because I'm doing one level deep, my logic here is pretty simple. All I need to do is check that the parent ID is not equal to the ID, and also need to check the existing comment ID is not equal to ID. So that will handle basically any comments and its children. But if you had kind of multiple levels of replies, then this logic would be slightly different. You're gonna have to, traverse the tree and all the children and get all the IDs and delete them somehow. But for our case here, this is going to be absolutely fine. And that's basically all you need for an in-memory one. That's all you need. If you wanted to add again different versions, you might add a constructor here with a reference, and add. Inside of this.comments here, you might actually fetch it from a database or an API, but again, we're going to keep this simple. So let's just quickly test that this works, because right now we've added an implementation. Let's just see if it really works. How can we quickly test it? Well, I'm just going to add a little test at the bottom here. I'm just going to run this file just to make sure that everything works. So how would we use this? Well, we're just going to instantiate a new instance of an in-memory backend, and then we're just going to log backend fetch comments. That should return nothing. We're then going to add a comment here. So you can just see I've added a comment with a user ID of 0, no parent, and text of hi. Then fetch it again. We should see one comment. Delete with the ID of 0. ID start 0. And then we fetch it finally, and we should see, we should see basically no comments again. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head over the project in the dist directory. If I just reload this guy, just make sure everything's there, we can see our backend JS here, and I can actually just run this this file directly. So if I just right click and run this guy, what we should see, oops, we've got an issue there, export class type module. So I've forgotten to add the type module because I'm using the module type here. So type module in the package JSON, there we go. And if I just, I think I should just be able to run this again. There we go. So if I scroll up here, you can see that I've logged empty array. We have the array with the one comment there, and then we have an empty array because we deleted it. So our in-memory backend is working, functional system. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add a new directory. We're going to use Vite to create a very simple React application, and then we're going to use the in-memory backend there, and see how that goes. So I'm going to go back into the terminal here, head out onto the root of the directory, and I'm going to do npm create, and I think I have it here, npm create Vite. So this is just scaffolding a React application with Vite. I'm going to say React. Let's do React TypeScript so we have everything. I'm going to cd into React here, and I'm just going to run npm install, and then we'll run that just to make sure everything's working fine. So let's get rid of this package. Oops. Let's close the library and close everything actually we have here. Let's open up the React. So now we're just in a React one here, and we're just going to head over to package.json, hit dev, and run that. So now we should be running a React application that's got nothing to do with the comments yet, but we'll get to that in a moment. And now we're just going to basically get rid of some of the boilerplate. So let's get rid of app CSS, app TSX. We don't need those. Don't need the logo. In the main, we're just going to add our function just to make sure this works. Return. Let's just do hello world. And we'll remove this guy and index CSS. We'll keep those for now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to paste some CSS from an example just to kind of make it look nice, and then we're just going to basically fill in everything in the main TSX here. So we're basically starting from scratch. So now that I've added the styling, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to import the library as a dependency into React. I'm going to hack this in a bit and just import it directly from the file system. So what I can do is I can do npm install, and I'm just going to go, I think it's up a directory, and go library, and that should work. I don't think I recommend this for kind of production use, but it's definitely going to be fine for the purposes of this tutorial. And basically what this gives us is library, and it just looks into the file system, so it goes down and gives us everything there. So let's start off by adding our imports. All we need is the comment and the in-memory backend types, and then we're going to have a reference to our actual backend. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have a place that we can actually set and maintain our comments within React. So we're just going to keep that in a use state hook, and then we're just going to add in our form and a way to basically view the comments. So we add the form here with a simple onSubmit handler. We'll fill that in a moment, and all that's going to do is it's going to have an input for a comment, which is required, and a button to actually submit the comment. Next up, let's map over the comments, and let's just display the label, and we'll come on to the replying and editing in a moment, but this should be enough to get us started. And then we're going to actually create our handle add function up here. So the handle add function is going to take in the event, and it's just going to be very simple. We're going to prevent any default behavior happening. We're going to go into the form, and we're going to get all the data out of the form, which is basically just the comment for now. So we're going to take the text from the comment. Here I've got this function taking the parent ID as well from an input called parent comment ID. You can see this doesn't exist yet, but later on when we handle the reply functionality, we're going to add one of these, and that way it basically will have a value. For now, it's just going to basically default to null. We're going to hard code a user ID. Of course, in your app, you might have an actual user ID. We're just going to hard code it in this case. And then we're just going to call out to the back end. We're just going to add the comment, pass in our fields. And because, again, we're in kind of React land here, we need to actually trigger a re-render. And we're going to trigger that re-render by setting the comments. So we want to set the comments, and we're just going to do that with the fetch comments command here. And finally, we're just going to reset the form. That way it just clears out when you hit enter. So if I save this guy, we can see on the right-hand side, we have our input with our comment, and we can type something here, hit enter, and we can see the comments coming here. So let's add the reply, delete, and obviously all the children functionality. So in order to do that, what we're going to do here is we're going to add a piece of state just to maintain a reply ID, and that will just be the reply ID of the comment that we're replying to. And then I'm going to go over here at the bottom. We're going to add a button with reply, and all this does is set the reply ID to the current comment ID. We're also going to add a delete button, and we'll fill in this function in a moment. And then we're going to conditionally show a form. So this form is going to be exactly the same as the form above. The only difference is it's going to be calling a kind of a proxy method, which we'll see in a moment. And we're going to add that parent ID, the parent comment ID that we talked about earlier on. And this is only going to show if the reply ID is equal to the existing comment ID. So if we go fill in these functions, we have the handle reply, and all this does is it calls the handle add, and then it sets the reply ID to null, so we no longer show the reply form. And then finally, the delete is just going to take in that ID. It's going to call the backend delete, and then it's just going to update the comments. So if I save it at this point, what we can do is if I add in a comment test and hi, we can see the reply and delete buttons. So I can of course delete one, and if I hit reply here, it shows the second form there with add instead of comment, and I can add a reply. Now we'll notice here that the reply is just going to be shown at the top level here, so it's just shown as with any other comment. So what we're going to do next is just basically show all the replied comments under the parent comment itself, and only allow it to reply one level deep. So we can filter the comments where the parent comment ID is equal to null, and this just means that this comment is a top level comment. So if I save this here, if I do test and I reply, it's basically just not going to show any of the child comments. And then what we can do is we can essentially take this entire kind of section here, and just paste it inside. Of course, you could extract this out to a component, do a few different things, but just to keep it simple, I'm just going to copy and paste. And instead of filtering on the top level comments, what we're going to do here is we're going to make sure that the parent comment ID is actually equal to the existing comment ID. So up here we have the comment ID, and we're just making sure that the child parent comment ID is equal to the parent comment ID. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense. And what I'll do is I'll actually just I'll rename these to child, just to kind of make that a bit more explicit. So this is the child we're talking about, and here we want the comment ID. And then again, when we're mapping here, let's rename this to child. I think that's all good. Just change this class name to child. So this would all work. The one thing we're going to change here is inside this form when we're replying, we don't want the parent ID to be the child ID, because that will just allow for the continuous nested replies. What we want is basically the parent comment ID here, and this is what keeps the flat structure. So I'm just going to reformat that and save it. So now if we come to the right hand side, if I put in parent 1 and parent 2, if I reply to the parent 1, child 1, you can see that's nested in under child, and then I can just keep going, child 2. So this should all be kind of a flat structure there, and same with here, hello. And if I delete 1, that works fine. And of course, if I delete the top one, that deletes the entire comment and all its children. And in terms of flexibility, here's the comment section I built for my app. So this one supports Markdown, so we can enter multiple lines here. We can just do all the standard Markdown things. You can see here it's got a bit more styling with Material UI, so we can kind of show and hide replies. I've added the kind of like functionality, and you can see that this is all syncing because I'm using Firebase as a backend. It's basically a real-time version of the existing comments, so that all works kind of nicely. So I think that's everything I wanted to cover in this video. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good day, and I will see you in the next one.